Okay, here we go. We are on Yud Bet Amud Aleph 12a, two lines up from the bottom. Amar Ravina. So we are a little bit behind. I mean, this is the Amud from last week. So the plan is to finish just today's Amud, and then on Wednesday, we're not going to be having shul tomorrow or Tuesday, but Wednesday night, Yisrat Hashem, to the full daf and to end the parak, Yisrat Hashem. So that is for Wednesday night. Okay, so we still need to answer the question of Yud Aleph Amud Bet, the bottom, which the question was, when a person says Zeh Kazeh, so he has a piece of meat, a kosher, regular piece of meat that he got from Sobeys, whatever, and beside it, there was a piece of meat of Zivche Shlamim Achar Zrikat Adam. That it was Shlamim after the sprinkling of the blood, where that shlamim is now allowed to be eaten. He says, this is like this. So the question is, do we go with the state of the shlamim now, which is allowed, and that's what he means, or do we go bi'ikaro kamatvis or behetera kamatvis? That's like quoting the two lines up from the bottom of Yud Aleph, and we're just looking at those words. Bi'ikaro kamatvis, do we go with, what was it an ikar? Like earlier, like in its main thing, this is a korban shlamim, and meaning before the sprinkling. So this was a shlamim, it's a korban. And you're connecting this kosher, regular piece of meat to a korban, that makes it asur. Or are you now want to connect it to this piece of meat, the shlamim, that it's at this point, it's mutar. So this is mutar. So that's the question. We still haven't answered it. Amar Ravina. Tashma. Come here. Kechalat Aharon uketrumato. Mutar. A person says, I want my piece of meat or I want my bread to be like the challah of Aaron, like the laws of challah, ukitrumato, or like truma. So the halacha here is mutar. So, meaning, we know that when you say, I have this piece of bread that I want to compare it to something else, so to make this bread asur, the something else that you're comparing it to needs to be something that became asur through a neder. So we said a korban is like that, because a korban was a regular animal, and then it became asur through a neder. Whereas teruma, at the beginning, it is asur, and it's always asur. And therefore, I'll explain that deeper in a moment, but therefore, because it's always asur, it's intrinsically asur, like a piece of chazir. So therefore, if I say this is like the piece of chazir, or this is like the truma, then in the hilchot and nedarim, you can't do that. And you can't compare it to something that was not, no neder that made that thing asur. And therefore it's going to be mutar. Therefore it's going to be allowed. Now, truma, on the one hand, you could say that it also becomes truma only when you declare it teruma. A whole field, I harvested an entire field, and then I'm going to take a portion of it to give to the Kohen. I'm going to say, okay, this is teruma. Until that point, it's not teruma. So it does start off beheter. But really, it starts off a field that teruma is not taken off of yet is actually tevel. And tevel is asur. You can't eat from the field in Eretz Yisrael, of course, until you take off teruma and maaser. So it's always asur. And then when I say this is teruma, it continues to be asur, and it continues to be. It's just now mutar to the kohen, but it's still asur to regular people. So it always remains asur the entire time. Okay, says the Gemara. Bottom line: Ha kitrumat lachme todah asur, but. Meaning, and now they're inferring, the Gemara is making a diuk, but terumat lachme todah is asur. Meaning, the Braita says, if you want to compare the this piece of bread that you have to teruma, if I say, oh, this is like this, it's mutar, because teruma is like a piece of chazir, it's always asur. We want to infer from there, though, teruma lachme todah would be asur. So, Truma v'lachme todah is when a person brought a korban todah, they also had to bring 40 breads. These 40 breads were four categories of breads. We're going to see it in the next page. Some were like matzah, some were like challah, some were like boiled bread, like a bagel, whatever. So 4 different categories, 10 of each loaves, and you have to give to the Kohen 1 from each category, so 4 out of the 40, and then the bread is allowed for the owner to eat the other remaining 36. And the lachmet todah itself, those 4 are asur to a regular person. It's only allowed for the Kohen. So the Gemara says, okay, if you compare your bread to teruma, it's going to be mutar because teruma is intrinsically asur. Maybe I could infer from here that trumat lachmet todah is asur. That if you're comparing this bread to the lachmet todah that goes to the Kohen, maybe if teruma you're saying is mutar, maybe that means this is asur, and that means that those breads only became about through a neder, and it's asur. This thing's asur because I'm comparing it to lachmet todah, and we're saying that it only came out through a neder. But if that's the case, then we have a question on that. Ve'ha, next page. Terumat lachmet todah lachar zrikat adami. This is our question that we had earlier. But hold on a second. Terumat lachmet todah is only after the sprinkling of the blood. So it's only given to the owner after the sprinkling of the blood. I mean, a person brings korban todah, and the korban is also, in order to enable the meat of that korban to be eaten, because korban todah is a shlamim, there needs to be the sprinkling of the blood, then the meat becomes mutar, and then the bread will be given, and then it's mutar also for the kohen and for the owner. But that comes after zrikat hadam. So if it's after zrikat hadam, then what happens? We're going to read the Ran in a moment. What's the Gemara asking? The Gemara is asking, when we said earlier zeh kazeh, what was our question? Our question was, I have a kosher piece of meat from Sobeys. I'm comparing, and I said, this is like this piece of meat that was from the shlamim after zrikat hadam. So we want to know, are you comparing it to the mutar state, or are you comparing it to the earlier state of shlamim? So that's the question. But now, if you want to say lachmet todah is asur, that means that lachmet todah, though, was brought after the zrikat hadam. That means that you're comparing your mutar item to the lachmet todah, which is after zrikat hadam, but it's asur. So you're going back to the ikar state the before state of asur, not in the mutar state of that 36 breads, whatever that's mutar now. You see, a proof from here, we're going back to the earlier state. Let's see the Ran on the top right. Ve'trumat lachmet todah la'achar zrikat hadami. Dekevan de lachmet todah lo sharu ba'achila ad la'achar zrika. Since lachmet todah are not allowed to be eaten until after the sprinkling, lama yitremu otan kodem lachen. Why would someone donate them beforehand? I'll explain this in a moment. Umidiktani asur, since it says asur, that lachmet todah is asur, shmamina, learn from it, ikaran kamatvis. You're connecting it to the ikar, not to the state right now.
Because after the zakat damim,
it's allowed. It's allowed. So if I say zekazeh, it's allowed. Boom, the Gemara made a diuk that it's not allowed. So that means you're going back to the ikar. And the Ran throws over here, lama yitremu otan kodem lachen, meaning, technically, when the guy is a korban todah, the logical way of doing things was you bring your korban, then you have the zrikat hadam, and then you have your breads, and you give your bread to the kohen. Meaning, after the sprinkling of the blood, breads are allowed. Here, kohen, take your 4. I get the 36. Now you could eat those 4 right away because we already did zrikat hadam. But technically, and we're going to see this later, I'm already giving a little bit of a head start, but the round it talks about it here. Technically, you could give the bread first, but the bread are not allowed till the Zrikat Adam. That's for sure. But you could give the bread first. There's two parts of Korban Todah: the actual slaughtering, and sprinkling, and the giving of the bread. So technically, you can say you bump to the Kohen before, and oh, by the way, I'm doing Korban Todah today. Here, take the bread, but I'll let you know when the sprinkling happens. People don't usually do that because they want to give it to them when it's already mutar to eat. So that's the usual. So that's the assumption now that it's lachar zrikat adam. Why is it lachar zrikat adam? Because you generally gave it lachar zrikat adam. But it doesn't. The Quran's telling us though, and we're going to see it later, it doesn't have to be that way. And you could give the bread before zrikat adam, and it's not mutar yet because before zrikat adam. Okay, so it seems like we have an answer here that bi'karant kamatvis, that you go on the earlier state of the korban, and that it's asur. Says the Gemara, Ema, says no, say ketrumat halishka asur. Say ketrumat halishka asur. Trumat halishka is the donation from the office, which is referring to machatzit shekel, and that's what's asur. Meaning like this. The Gemara is saying, Ema, say what? Say instead of, if you look back at just the page, turn the page back to Yud Bet Amud Aleph, when we said this statement of, like the truma, it's mutar. That's what the Braita said. If I say this is like truma, it's mutar because truma is intrinsically asur. Ha, ke trumat lachmet todah asur. I make an inference. Oh, if truma is mutar, truma lachmet todah is asur. Says the Gemara, don't infer truma lachmet todah is asur. Infer machatzit shekel is asur. That's what your inference should be, right? If I say, don't infer
not
that.
Every truma, right?
What?
Not like every truma, just the machatzit shekel.
Yeah, just machatzit shekel. Yeah, we're going to talk about other trumas in a moment. But well, this is another truma. Trumat lachmet todah. So the Gemara says, don't make that inference, right? Like, let's say I could infer. I'm trying to give a comparison. Well, a basic comparison. If my watch is worth $100, I can infer the rich guy's watch is worth more. But don't infer. Now you're saying, no, don't infer that. Infer that if my watch is worth $100, I don't know. And like, it's not a good thing. But it's like basically like, why are you inferring that? That's not the only thing you could infer from there. Basically, there's other things you could infer. When I say this is like truma and that's mutar, you want to say, oh, so truma lachmet todah is asur. Why is that the automatic inference from truma's mutar? You could have another inference from there that machatzit shekel is asur. That's what the Gemara wants to say, and therefore, if the inference is machatzit shekel is asur, trumat halishka is asur, that means if I say this is like machatzit shekel, then it's going to be asur. Because machatzit shekel also is something that was once mutar, and through my neder became asur. I had regular cash money, and now I said this is going to be machatzit shekel. So through my words, I made this kadosh, machatzit shekel, and it wasn't always like that. And therefore, if I say this money is like machatzit shekel, it's going to make it asur. Because this was once, this is like it became machatzit shekel through a neder. It's like a korban. So the Gemara says, don't infer trumat lachmet todah. Infer machatzit shekel is asur. So the Gemara, okay, hold on a second. Aval trumat lachmet todah mai mutar. So you want to say, okay, fine. So don't infer it's asur. Do you want to say then that trumat lachmet todah is mutar, is allowed? If you want to, if you're not saying if you're not saying it's asur, then you're saying it's mutar. So if you're saying it's mutar, litni lachmet todah v'kol sheken trumato. So the Gemara says, okay, then if you're saying that lachmet todah is mutar, then the Braita should have said lachmet todah is mutar, and I would have for sure learned that regular truma is mutar. So then the Gemara is asking a question back and saying, hold on a second. You tell me don't infer that Trumat Lachmet Todah is Asur. Don't infer that. Infer Machatzit Shekel. And then, if we're inferring Machatzit Shekel, by the way, then we don't have an answer to our question, because we don't have this thing of Achar Zukat Adamim. We're not talking about that at all. We're talking about Machatzit Shekel. There's no connection to that. And I have no answer to the Zek question. Fine, but then the Gemara says, okay, but you want to tell me that Lachmet Todah is not Atzur, it's Mutar? If it's Mutar, Litni, the Braita should have said, now it's a question of the Braita, if you're telling him it's Mutar, the Braita should have said, Lachmet Todah, v'kol sheken Trumato. Meaning, our Braita, when we started today, Amar Ravina, Tashma, come in here. What says in the Braita? What does it say in the Braita? Kechalat Aharon Trumato Mutar. That's all said in the Braita. And then Ha was an inference from the Braita. But the Braita says, Truma is Mutar. If I say now that Truma Lachmet Todah is Mutar, the Braita should have said something stronger. The Braita should have said, Trumat Lachmet Todah is Mutar, and I would have for sure learned from there that regular Truma is Mutar. So what's the logic here? Trumat Lachmet Todah is Mutar, means that Trumat Lachmet Todah is like Chazir. That it never became Asur through a Neder. That's a little bit of a jump to say that, because Trumat Lachmet Todah was regular bread. Now I dedicate it to the Korban Todah, and it becomes Asur through me dedicating it. Meaning Truma, we said, through Neder, Truma, we said that really it's always Asur, because it's Tevel. I can't walk into a field in Israel, cut off some wheat and just take it, even if the owner allows me, because you have to do Teruman Maser first. So it starts with Tevel, which is Asur, and when I say this is Teruma, it remains Asur to regular people, not for the Kohen. So Truma, I understand, it's like Chazir. Trumat Lachmet Todah is it's allowed. I mean, it's wheat that's after Truma. Now I turn this into Lachmet Todah. It's like a neder. It should be Asur. But for some reason we're saying it's Mutar. For some reason we're jumping and saying it's like Chazir. That it's like always Asur. If that's what's going on, that's a Chidush. Then all the more so Truma is going to be Asur. Because we know Truma from Tevel, it's Asur all the time. If you're telling me Truma Lachmet Todah, that's compared to Chazir, for sure regular Truma is. And therefore, if the Braita wants to tell you a Chidush, because we always want to teach you novelties, things you wouldn't have thought of. So it's saying Truma is Mutar, meaning Truma is like Chazir, that I could kind of understand. But Truma Lachmet Todah, I want to say that that's like Chazir. You should have said that, and I would have for sure known that regular Truma is like Chazir. Meaning, so if I'm saying Truma Lachmet Todah is like Chazir, I would have for sure learned Truma is like Chazir, and therefore say in the Braita Truma Lachmet Todah instead of regular Truma.
Did I misunderstand? You said like regular term is mutar like chazir, so which means chazir, or
meaning
you just made a mistake.
What I mean mutar is because if I compare my regular bread to truma, it's going to be mutar because truma is like chazir, that they are intrinsically asur, and in the chot nedarim you can't connect your regular piece of bread or your regular piece of meat to because those became asur.
The bread is
the bread's mutar. Yeah. Not truma or chazir.
Doesn't hold.
What?
The neder doesn't hold.
Doesn't hold, exactly. Neder doesn't hold. I have to compare neder to something that became asur through a neder. So that's the question right now. If you're saying Trumat Lachmet Todah is mutar, say that in the Braita. Answers the Gemara. Hakamash Malan. No, we come to teach you that is actually what the Braita is saying. Trumat Lachmet Todah, Trumatohi. Trumat Lachmet Todah is like Teruma. And meaning, when the Braita said, Gemara wants to answer, when the Braita said, Trumato mutar, when it's a Trumato mutar, it's including both Trumas. That's what the Gemara was answering. The Trumato mutar is Trumat Lachmet Todah and regular Truma. And the question was, Trumato mutar is regular teruma. If you're telling me Trumat Lachmet Todah is mutar, which means it's like chazir, mutar for the regular bread, and therefore it's like chazir, that's like a jump. Say that, and I'll learn kol sheken, all the more so regular truma. So say that in the Braita. And says the Gemara, it is built into the Braita. When we said Trumato Mutar, we didn't mean just the regular Truma. I meant the umbrella of Trumas. Trumat Lachmet Todah and regular Truma. And that's what it means. Okay, so at this point, therefore, we've answered the Braita that Truma and Truma Lachmet Todah is Mutar. That means what's Asur? Machatzita shekel. But there's nothing over here of achar zrikat adam or anything like that. So we have no proof on our question of zeh kazeh. Now the Gemara wants to say another answer to this whole question that we've been discussing, but it's another answer to. It's still not going to answer our question of zeh kazeh, but another answer how we could get out of this situation. Meaning, what's the situation over here? We had a question going back a few steps to like the first line on the top of the page was the Braita says Truma is mutar. I can infer from there Truma Lachmet Todah is asur. Then where did our Gemara go with that? No, don't infer Truma Lachmet Todah. Infer Machatzita shekel. Another answer now is, okay, you want to infer Truma Lachmet Todah, and you're saying it's achar zrikat adam. That means you're going back to ikaro matvis. Says the Gemara, no. Maybe you gave the bread beforehand, as we said earlier. Maybe you gave the bread before Zrikat Adam. If you gave the bread before Zrikat Adam, then that bread is Asur. And now that it's Asur, there's no... It's Asur all the time. It's not like Zeh Kazeh. This is like the bread, and the bread now is... Do I go with the bread now is Mutar? Do I go with when it was earlier? You're giving it in a time before Zrikat Adam. It's always Asur. So that's going to be the Gemara's other answer. Let's see. 5 lines down. You can say another answer. Trumat Lachmet Todah nami kodem zrikat adamu. Trumat Lachmet Todah, it's possible that it was done before Zrikat Adam. And if it's done before Zrikat Adam, that means that it's Asur. That means when I'm doing a neder, that this is like Lachmet Todah. Well, Lachmet Todah is before Zrikat Adam. That's for sure Asur. It never got Mutar yet. So it's not an answer to our question of Zeh Kazeh. Do I go with the Mutar state or the Ikar state, which is Asur? This is always Asur right now. And Kegon, how can I do Truma Lachmet Todah before Zrikat Adam? For instance, the Afrashinu Belisha, that you gave the Kohen in a state of dough. That for Rashinu Belisha, you've given to them in a state of dough. So the Ran does say technically you could also give it in a state when it's already baked. Okay, the Gemara wanted to go with this state for some reason.
I don't think you give it a state of dough when you make the dough, I think, right?
Yeah, but afreshinu belisha, that you're mafresh it for the kohanim in a dough state. I mean, you could, and that's lifnei zrikat adam.
Yeah, you could do it at home. It's just that you're doing it at home, the aflasha tzma, right? Like the.
Yeah, I guess if you're doing it at home, if you're doing
bring it to the kohen, so in a dough form.
In a dough form.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's just it, before zrikat adam, and so when it's before zrikat adam in a dough state. The Ran does say again that it could be even achar hafiyah kodem zrikat adam. שהרי הפייתן הייתה קודמת, אפילו שחיטת הזבח. תאמרים מנחות שאם נשחט הזבח קודם זה שיקרמו פני כולן לא קדש, אלא כיוון דמייתי ראיה מדרב טובי, דמצ להפריש קודם זריקה, דרב טובי מרי מדרב שינו ולישאיו. Okay, yes, the Ran saying, we're going to see in a moment the words of Rav Tuvi. And Rav Tuvi's words is a case of dough, a state of dough. Can you do Lachmet Todah if you have 4 big doughs instead of 40? But each dough is the size of the 10. So he's talking about dough, so the Gemara answers a state of dough. But technically you could even give them after it's been baked, before Zrikat Adam. Okay. So back to the Gemara. Kegon da'afreshinu belisha. For instance, the case is, one is the kodem zrikat adam, that you gave it to them in a state of dough. V'chiyah de'amar Rav Tuvi bar Kisna amar Shmuel lachme toda she'afa'an be'arba chalot yatsa v'aketiv arba'im. Says the Gemara, question. Hold on. But Rav Tuvi bar Kisna said in the name of Shmuel, lachme toda, that you baked in 4 chalot, and each of those 4, let's say, are big enough to hold 10, the size of the 10, but you did in 4 chalot, you're yotzeh. But it says, v'aketiv arba'im, but we know the pasuk says 40. 1 second. I'm not sure where we're going with this question. Actually, you had that number to be. Oh, the questions are going to be at the end. The questions at the end where if the case is we're taking it a state of dough. Hold on a second. Maybe you can't take it a state of dough, and now we're going to ask the question. It's going to go down a bunch of lines of the question. The Gemara is going to answer yes. You can take it a state of dough. That's where we're going to end today's shiur. We're going to get there. Okay. 1 second here. Okay. Shekel. Okay. So again, we were giving it in a time of dough, which is before Zukat Adam. And we're going to ask, is that possible? Now we're getting to the halachot of mafrish, the chala, the trumat chala of lachmet todah. If you could do it in a state of dough. V'chiyada amar Rav Tuvi bar Kisna amar Shmuel lachmet todah she'afan be'arba chalot yatsa v'aktiv arba'im. Hold on a second. So now we're going to go into the words of Rav Tuvi bar Kisna. He says if you bake it as 4 big chalot, you're yotzeh, but it says 40. And says the Gemara lemitzvah, meaning it's ideal 40, but technically if you have 4 and they're big that cover the size of the 40, you're still yotzeh. Says the Gemara v'abai lemishka truma, but you have to take a truma on each one. You have to take a little bit of each one and give to the Kohen. How are you going to do that with 4 big chalot? If you're going to say deshakil chada rifta al kula, if you're going to say you're going to give 1 bread out of the 4, and that's going to cover the other 3, ve'atanan, it says in the Mishnah, echad mikol korban shelo yitol mikorban al chavero. You have to give 1 for every korban, and 1 cannot cover for its friend. So, echad, etanan, the pasuk says echad, and we learn from there, mikol korban shelo yitol mikorban al chavero. You can't take from 1 to cover the other. So, from giving 1 bread out of the 4, we said, remember, it's 4 different categories. So if it's 4 different categories, right, we're going to see in a moment the different categories, but if it's 4 different categories, and you're giving 1 out of the 4, you're giving 1 on its friend. And that's not supposed to work out. V'chitema de shakil prusa mikochad vechad. And if you're going to say that you take a piece from each of the 4 breads, echad shelo yitol prusa. It has to be echad. The pasuk says echad, 1. It has to be whole, that you don't give a piece. So how is this working out? So the the question is like this. We said that you could be mafrish the lachmet odah in a state of dough. How does this work out? Because Rav Tuvi Bar Kisna says the following: you could bake it in 4 chalot, and you could be yotzeh lachmet odah that way, not 40. What do you mean? It says 40. So no, 40 is the mitzvah. You could do 4 with a big size, and that works. But hold on, you have to give some from each of those 4. So, and if you do one, if you're going to give 1 out of the 4, you can't give 1 to cover its friends. It's 4 different categories. And if you're taking 1 piece out of each of those, then if you're taking 1 piece out of each of those, then it needs to be whole. You can't give a piece. So how do you do this? So how do you give it in a how do you still yotzeh that you're lachmet odah? It says ela dafreshinu b'lisha. Rather you give it in a state of dough. And you give a piece of dough. So it's 4 big doughs. I give it so the truth of the Ran says as follows: each dough, what you actually do is you divide the dough in a state of dough into 10 pieces.
That's fine.
Yeah, you divide the dough in 10 pieces. This dough in 10 pieces. This dough in 10 pieces. This dough in 10 pieces. Then I give 1 to the Kohen. 1 to the Kohen, 1 to the Kohen, 1 to the Kohen. And then you bake
1 big piece.
1 big piece, 1 big piece, 1 big piece, 1 big piece.
9.
From the 9, and then then it's fine.
So they didn't have to bake it. The kohanim.
And it was done in the Bet HaMikdash, I think.
The person, no, isn't it the person who brings the...
Does that at home? I don't know if...
If he's bringing it in dough form, how can he
Dough
cook?
form.
He cannot do
Actually,
it.
no, I don't think they're talking about giving it as a dough form. It's just you can separate.
You separate in the case of dough form.
Only separating in dough form, not giving it in the dough form.
Separating in the dough form, and therefore... But that's before Zrikat Adam.
Yeah.
And we just want to know how that works halachically, and we're saying it could work because that's the last point over here. No, how does it work according to Rav Tuvi that you get 4 big chalot? How does that work? So really, it's that you took the piece of dough out of 1/10 of the dough from each of those 4. You took that out for the Kohen, and then you made 4 big things.
Be a smaller piece than it would have been, I guess, if it was 40 initially, right? Maybe, I don't know. Because you just need to bring 10%, like 1% of 10, right? Which is 10%.
Yeah, 1 out of 10, 10%.
1 out of 10, yeah.
I don't know. It seems like it's got to be the right size, whatever the minimum size of those 4. Each one of those 40. That's the
That just
4
bring
big
the
ones.
10% and make sure it's 1 out of 4 different types of.
Yeah. 1 from each of the 4.
Yeah, I didn't get the answer to Menashe's question. Can we bring it in a dough form to be baked in Bet HaMikdash, or?
So I'm not sure.
That was my understanding.
Right. Yeah, I'm not sure, but I think that's a side question because we just want to know: can you separate it? And I think give it to the Kohen. I think give it to the Kohen also in a dough form. Because then what? How do we answer the whole question? The whole question is that it's separated before Zrikat Adam. If it's separate before Zrikat Adam.
But again, it's like, for example, he's a binyat, Zebulun. He's coming from, from Tiberias and etc. He's bringing it he separated as a dough form. Now he will go back, cook, and bring it back. It's impossible. It has to be cooked there.
In the Bet HaMikdash.
It's not like
I
only
think so.
Yerushalmis that doing korban. It's everyone, and it's
Right.
so.
Yeah, but yes, it makes sense. But our discussion here is:
I know,
can you
yeah.
give it to the Kohen in that state, or already separate for the Kohen, Because the whole thing here is zeh kazeh, right? We're saying this kosher piece of bread that I got already baked from Sobeys, I want to make it like this lachmet todah. So the Gemara is saying you could have lachmet todah lifnei zrikat adam, and therefore it would be asur because lifnei zrikat adam there's no well, we're saying it's actually mutar because it's like truma, but it's not. You can't. It's not answering our question of heter or not heter because it could be done lifnei zrikat adam. How could it be done lifnei zrikat adam? Even in a dough state. Now, I guess when you mafresh it in a dough state, so now that's a question which I think is not exactly on topic. Is are you just separating in a dough state, or are you giving it to the kohen in a dough state? Yeah, the Gemara keeps on saying separating in a dough state. As the Gemara shall prove, the truma of todah bread does not have to be separated after the zrika, but may be separated while the bread is still in a form of dough, which is before the offering is slaughtered and obviously before the blood is thrown. The todah breads are always baked before the animal is slaughtered, because the bread becomes fully sanctified as an offering when the animal is slaughtered, and it cannot attain the sanctity unless it has been baked. Thus, since the Gemara shall prove that the truma may be taken in a dough form, we automatically know that this means it will be taken before zrika. The truma can also be separated after the bread is baked and the animal is slaughtered, and before the blood is thrown, as we said in Ran. However, since the Gemara's proof deals with the situation in which the separation is done before the baking, it mentions specifically this case. Okay, so yeah, it's got to be baked before the korban finishes, before zrikat adam. But I think you could give it to the kohen in a case of in a situation of dough.
Yeah,
but it's got to be baked before. It's got to be baked before zrikat adam. Who bakes it? And I don't know the halachot of maybe it's got to be on site also in the Bet HaMikdash. I would assume so. If it's
because distances would make.
Yeah. I assume that it's done in the Bet HaMikdash. At the end of the day, so we're going to stop over here. We're 5 lines up from the bottom, which is Lema Ketanai. And at the end of the day, we tried answering this question of Zeh Kazeh. When I compare this kosher piece of meat to this piece of meat that's after Zrikat Adam of Shlamim, do I look at that as a now situation or as a earlier situation when it was a Korban Shlamim? We tried answering with Trumat Lachmet Todah. It's after Zrikat Damim. We answered 2 answers that it can't. This is not a proof to that answer to that question. The first was maybe the inference is not talking about Truma Lachmet Todah, talking about Machatzit Sheker, or we're talking about Lachmet Todah, but it's before Zrikat Adam because you could separate it before Zrikat Adam, and therefore there's not a comparison to the Zeh Kazeh case. So we still don't have an answer for that. Chazaku Baruch. Revucha is, I think, a mix. What did it say there? The 4 different types?
Yeah, matzah from the wafer and the one that is
Wafer and pieces? What's revucha?
Wafer.
Oh no, revucha is, I think, the in water. Is that the water form one?
It's called the one they put in hot water.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Okay, Chazaku Baruch.
Chazak Baruch.
Chazaku Baruch.